Professional Development Symposium on Social Media and Aesthetic Medicine, Blurring the Boundaries of Professionalism. So Jennifer Splain is relatively new to aesthetics, but has really found the passion in what she wants to do. Great injector, has a great skill set, but her main thing that she does is that she's a researcher. So we're very lucky to have her on the THMA team in leading the THMA clinical research team. So I will let you take it away from there, Jen, and you can explain your many hats, and then we'll get into the presentation.
Sure. Okay, so thanks for having me, Tracy. Today, what I'm going to talk about is really what we do know, what we don't know, and how we can hopefully improve social media use in aesthetic medicine. Make sure my... Okay, so just a little bit about myself. So like Tracy said, I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm recently started a practice in aesthetic medicine, and it's something that I've just absolutely grown to love. I'm also a doctorate candidate at Dalhousie University. I'm a practice and education consultant with the Nurses Association of New Brunswick, and that's our New Brunswick regulatory college. And I'm an academic instructor at the University of New Brunswick. And I'm a mom of two, which this was actually an addition by my daughter. When I started the slide, who am I? That was her suggestion. I do want to do a disclaimer that I'm not here representing either Dalhousie or UNB or the Nurses Association. I'm here representing myself, and I'm here as a nurse practitioner colleague. So we have seen social media explode and expand at an exponential rate, really since its introduction, essentially in the early 2000s, 2004, when we saw Facebook come out. I know the title of this presentation is Blurring the Boundaries of Professionalism, but I don't think that is to say that social media is intrinsically a threat to healthcare professionals. It's typically user error that leads to the negativity surrounding social media, and how it's used and how it's portrayed with healthcare professionals. So we do know that it has the potential, and it's been demonstrated to be a powerful tool, and it's really all in the manner in which it's employed. And it's our responsibility to recognize these types or the potential consequences of misuse. So here's a couple examples of how it's, two sides of the same coin. So you have these great, awesome, positive impacts of social media, but then you have negative potentials connected to it. So we have almost unlimited access to others. We have a plethora of ways to interact, but with that comes this sense of online invincibility. And we've really started to stray away from those in-person social conventions. We've kind of stopped using our forms of politeness and deference. It's really easy to say and do anything when you're on the other side of the screen. Another example is everything we do, how we act, how we react. There is no time or space barrier associated with social media. So this is great for satisfying, that instant gratification that we all crave. But it can be detrimental to our professional image when we don't have those built-in opportunities to pause and reflect before you post. So anecdotally, we know that we have experienced some of the benefits and some of the pitfalls of social media in healthcare. But what does the literature tell us? As a nurse scientist, I usually shy away from speaking in anecdotes. So I like to look to the literature. So it's understood that social media is increasingly becoming a really crucial tool in healthcare. not only in how we interact, like I had just mentioned, but how we receive and share healthcare information. So worldwide, more than 40% of healthcare consumers, so largely patients, use social media for their healthcare needs. And this has likely grown since that data was collected, like everything else when it comes to technology. There are some proven benefits of social media in the literature that I think are really important to highlight because we really talk a lot about the dangers. So a systematic review found that for patients, it actually fosters more autonomy by being able to complement information that has been provided by their healthcare professional. And it also, on that same vein, it starts to shift that power imbalance and really allows for more a collaborative relationship. It provides psychosocial support, and it can also improve psychological well-being. Also, when patients use social media, it helps healthcare professionals by providing a tool that strengthens the practice or organization's market position, which is, something that we tend to think about in the private sector, as well as stimulating conversation for brand building and improving service delivery. Some of the advantages of social media for healthcare professionals include being able to share in that patient empathy, again, strengthening that therapeutic relationship through sharing in that patient empathy, and effective patient management at a mass scale. And then we also have reported benefits of social media on the healthcare professional persona. So social media has a positive impact on professional networking. And this can be through improving established networks that are already in place that we all have, or offering new possibilities for collaboration and creation of communities of support. And shout out to THMA. It's a great example of how social media is used to this effect. So social media is a big part of how this community interacts. Social media has also, unlocked new ways of acquiring knowledge and to gain access to information from experts that we might not normally be able to connect with. It serves as, a pipeline for newly published evidence. Many journals are now turning to social media to disseminate updates and healthcare information to their end users, so us. And then, of course, we already know that 40% of patients use social media for healthcare. So it's been shown to be a positive tool for patient education, being able to manage chronic disease, those sorts of things. One thing that I wanted to add here that I thought was interesting was that in one of the articles I read, social media was also found to give healthcare professionals and nursing specifically more professional autonomy. So by establishing that digital foothold, it was a way in which they could start to balance that healthcare hierarchy that we have seen historically. So on the flip side, healthcare providers, we need to be really vigilant about navigating the dangers of social media, and all of those possible negative impacts that come along with it. So most commonly reported in the literature included the erosion of that professional image. So this really happens through the loosening of accountability that we see that comes with social media use. And most notably through, unprofessional depiction and behavior. So there was a study conducted with nursing students that talked about sort of some of those most common dangers, and they included posting unprofessional remarks about colleagues, patients, or their place of work, followed by profanity use, breaching patient privacy, using prejudicial language, and incidences of cyberbullying. So another thing that I wanted to mention about this is I know this study looks specifically at nursing students, and a lot of studies with social media do look at students. And we may think that we don't see as much with veteran nurses, but I want to point out that it has less to do with age and more to do with at what point in the technology continuum you're entering practice. So whether we're talking about nursing students or new learners in aesthetic medicine, all new practitioners today will be some of the last to remember a time that they practiced before the widespread use of social media. And they are going to be some of the first to be practicing in largely an e-health environment. So the next danger that I have here is pretty self-explanatory, and that's compromising patient safety. And tied to this, obviously, you have your breaches of privacy and confidentiality. More than one study showed that the frequency of Facebook status updates by healthcare students was directly related to an increased risk of violating HIPAA online. So I thought that was interesting that it was found in 2 or 3 studies, I think, in this review. But also part of compromising patients' safety, part of that piece is the potential for disseminating misleading and inaccurate information. And particularly if this is influenced by, confliction or biased interests. When this happens, you start to see an erosion of the public trust, by providing poor quality information. And it's not just the trust in that individual practitioner, but it's the trust in our profession, and it's the trust in our field or specialty. So something always to consider before posting are those 3 Ps of social media. It's powerful, it's public, and it's permanent. The last recorded danger that I will mention here that we probably don't always consider is actually the negative impact that social media has on the psychological well-being of the provider. So notifications, whether they're auditory, visual, hepatic, they have been proven to be a source of distraction and stress, leading to poor work efficiency and memory. And this is even if they're on silent mode, is what they found. So we really need to safeguard our own health. And another thing that I did read that I didn't add on this slide is the use of humor with professional social media accounts. So it was found that expressions of humor online are considered to be more perilous, and that was the words of this article, perilous, than in face-to-face conversations with patients. And I'm a huge fan of using humor respectfully, in my professional roles. I think it helps nurture and develop that therapeutic relationship, ease tensions, but it's just to be aware that it can so easily be taken out of context online. And jokes may just not land the way you intended them to land. So caution when incorporating humor in your social media. Okay. So we've been talking about healthcare in general. And one of the reasons for that is because this is where all of our current evidence is. But what about aesthetic medicine? We see firsthand the use of social media in this specialty, and we can anecdotally, again, I use the word anecdotally, we can appreciate all of the positive and negative impacts of social media. But when it comes down to it, there really is not much empirical evidence exploring social media in this field of nursing. I'd likely hypothesize that aesthetic nursing social media has become one of the greatest threats to nursing e-professionalism today in Canada. I know that's a pretty bold statement. And to the aesthetic medicine field in general. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about this right now. And what makes aesthetic medicine different from other specialties or fields of nursing? The majority of nursing in Canada, as you know, is conducted within the public healthcare system, and aesthetic medicine is conducted almost exclusively in the private sector in fee-for-service business models. So you get into this new realm of nursing marketing, and one of the most efficient and easiest, effective ways of marketing today is through social media channels. And I mean marketing in general. So marketing your credentials, marketing your brand, marketing your practice, not just marketing promotions and prices. So as a result, and because it's outside of our public healthcare system, sometimes aesthetic nursing is seen as separate from other forms of nursing, and there can be this disconnect from our professional standards and ethics and obligations. And when this is displayed publicly, it really trivializes the entire profession for everyone and the entire specialty. So that leads us to our current study, and this was what Tracy was talking about at the very beginning. So as I said before, there's really no empirical evidence on the impact of social media, specifically in aesthetic medicine. So how do we make changes before we know what we're looking at, before we have any data to support any changes? So we're doing a cross-sectional descriptive survey, which we've piloted already among aesthetic providers, which likely you've seen come through email. So I wanted to share some of those preliminary results. We have 65 responses so far to the pilot survey. And when I say pilot survey, I mean, we plan to use all of this data in our final report, but it's also a means to be able to improve and adapt the survey to better address, okay, what are our research questions and what is the purpose of our study? And are we getting the data that we need? Not just the data that we want. So some of these I'll go through quickly because they are demographic in nature. But so the first question here, you know, the majority of the respondents were from Ontario at 60%. Most had been in nursing for more than 10 years in general, and then in aesthetic medicine for 1 to 3 years. So this is a distribution of employment. So overall together you have 80% that are self-employed, and then 60% of that in their own practice, 60% total. And here, you know, Facebook and Instagram were the most used platforms, likely a combination of the two. They tend to go hand in hand. Let's see my questions here. Okay, so more than half of the respondents develop their own social media content. And almost everyone has a separate personal and professional page, which I think is interesting because there's a concept of social media dual citizenship that is actually a recommendation in the literature on how to mitigate those professional threats. So having those separate personal professional profiles. So 95% said that their main target audience was clients or patients, and that patient recruitment and education were the primary foci. And in terms of social media consumers, most were patients and most were living locally to the healthcare provider. So these questions ranked the threat level of social media activity on professionalism from the perception of providers. So ranked highest on a threat level was unprofessional behavior, and then misleading information about treatments, over promotion of products and or services, breaches in nurse-patient relationship, videos of self-injecting procedures, and then negative comments against patients, colleagues, and the specialty in general. So this question was regarding awareness of the college's statements or guidelines on social media use, or other self-employment guidelines that speak to marketing and advertising. So most were aware, but there were some that did not know that they existed. And then I want to briefly touch upon these two open-ended questions. And this is a word cloud that SurveyMonkey did on their own. And it's kind of funny because, these are all lengthy responses. They're, full sentences, and they just pick out random words out of the sentences. So you can ignore the word cloud. But the first question, do you feel that the nursing colleges should have more strict guidelines for aesthetic medicine? This was split almost 50-50. It was 46% said yes, and then the rest said no. And do you think that change is needed to maintain professionalism in aesthetic nursing? And that was at 60% said yes, 40% saying no. And some didn't respond. This actually was a question where we had people skip it. So these open-ended questions were actually a really good segue into talking about nursing regulation and aesthetic medicine. And I want to reiterate again that I'm not here representing the New Brunswick regulatory body, but given my role, I do have a lot of familiarity with nursing regulation, and specifically in my province, but also cross-jurisdictionally, because we do a lot of jurisdictional scans of what other provinces are doing. So nursing in Canada is a self-regulated profession, which is really considered a privilege granted by the government. And that can be taken away. And what self-regulation recognizes is that nurses themselves are the best qualified to determine the standards of nursing education and practice. Most jurisdictions in Canada use what is called right touch regulation. And this is really about using the minimal amount of regulatory force to achieve a desired outcome. So colleges are moving away from static set of rules to a concept where regulation level is proportionate to the level of risk to the public. And I've listed the core principles here. So regulation is proportionate. You're only intervening when necessary, and it's proportionate to the risk imposed. It's consistent, so it must be implemented fairly. It's targeted, so it's really focused on the problem. It needs to be transparent and accountable, so colleges need to be open. Regulations should be simple. Decisions have to be justified, and they really should be able to withstand public scrutiny. And then finally, agile, so it should always be looking forward to adapt to anticipated change. So the reason I talk about this is because in terms of question 16 of our survey, should colleges be more strict? I think it's important to understand how regulatory decisions work. So most, if not all, jurisdictions in Canada do have guidelines related to medical aesthetics. These guidelines vary from province to province, mostly because there's different legislation in every province. But when we compare the guidelines to other specialty practices where there are no regulatory guidelines per se, there's a lot more resources in this field. And I would say this is more due to the fact that it's a fast-growing specialty. It's largely self-employed. So we see a lot of guidelines around, for example, complementary healthcare services in nursing for that same reason. And we will see more guidelines evolve in other non-traditional nursing roles that are becoming more traditional as things continue to evolve. So this may be an unpopular sentiment, but I would argue that aesthetic nursing is likely adequately regulated when we look at other aspects of nursing. And it really falls to the responsibility of the nurse to understand and uphold their professional standards. So consistent education and awareness of these factors is going to be our best tool. Oops, my light went out. In terms of, making aesthetic medicine less trivialized with the use of social media. Okay, so where do we go from here? So the results of our study ideally will help guide future interventions for improving, digital professionalism in aesthetic medicine. But these are some practice points that we can adopt initially that are already in the literature, based on findings that other researchers have found. So these are some of the founding principles for social media professionalism in nursing based on work by Ellaway and colleagues in 2015. So we talked about this earlier. Social media is not an intrinsic threat to nursing professionalism. Nurses should use social media in ways that support the principles of patient care, compassion, altruism, and trustworthiness. Nurses should be aware of the shaping nature of their relationship with social media. So that comes back to, the 3 Ps. It's powerful, it's permanent. I forget what the other P was. And nurses should maintain the capacity for deliberate, ethical, and accountable social media practices. And this is no different and aligns with our expectations of nursing practice. These principles lead to digital professionalism, to a framework that is built on these concepts that you'll see. That's a triangle. It's built on the concepts of proficiency, reputation, and responsibility, and that is what we can use to guide our digital presence. So how can we translate this framework into practice? Some of these can be employed at the individual level, so that's each and every one of us, but some of them are really broad and they need to be, incorporated and woven into the educational and system level, and that takes time. But really it's about moving through the cycle of awareness, assessment, and accountability. So starting with awareness, that's why we're here today. We're talking about it. We're looking at ways that we can improve this. We're making it the forefront. We want to always be assessing our current practices when it comes to social media and nursing, and in our field of aesthetic medicine. And then accountability. So always reviewing and being aware of the boundaries, the risks, the potentially negative outcomes that come with social media, but also being able to leverage those constructive uses of social media that we identified earlier, because there are many, and it's all in the manner in which it's used. So I have some examples here of how we can apply that framework to social media use in aesthetic medicine. And I think so I have my references here. I think a couple things to take away. I probably talked really fast. I don't even know what time it is. I think a couple things to take away is that we're still exploring the impact that social media has on aesthetic medicine and nursing professionalism, both positive and negative, so that we can make informed recommendations for practice. The same nursing standards that apply to our presence at the bedside apply to our online presence, which may lead people to consider that social media dual citizenship if they haven't already done so. And then finally, promoting awareness, constantly doing your assessment and reviewing your accountabilities related to social media use, that will positively shape our digital proficiency. It will uphold our reputation, and it will allow us to practice responsibly. And those are, those core concepts of the digital professionalism framework. And that's it. And I open it up to discussion, debate, kind debate, questions. I'm certainly not an expert on this topic,